Okay, so I started off by saying what our four key challenges are, and now I just want to kind of like highlight some of the other ones and say a little bit more about professionalism and the others that I mentioned. First of all, we are still a profession that is not really given credit for the amazing work that we do, either in the academy or in the field. So we still have, after over 100 years of being around as a profession, we're still having to prove that we're professionals, that we're research-led, and all of those things. Greening social work is really important for curriculum development and placement development. And I hope that after you finish listening to me about why we need to green the profession, you will go and ask your line manager or your academic teachers or your tutors to help you with that. The other reason that I think we have to green social work is because we've become extremely bureaucratic and we've lost the relationship building elements. And green social work, which I'll define in a moment, is really about relationship building and going back to where we were before the new public management came into being. The other thing which we've always known about is really grotesque economic inequalities. And I think COVID has really highlighted how terrible the situation for so many people, not just in this country, which is appalling enough given that we're one of the richest countries in the world, but actually for the world as a whole. More and more people have become poor because of unemployment and because of the lack of trade that's been happening because of COVID-19. And I'll talk about COVID in more detail later on. The other thing that I think COVID has really highlighted for us is how ineffectual our international institutions are. Now, we always knew that, but this time I think it's come closer to home. So we knew that the UN's peacekeeping corps never was able to really establish peace in any of the areas. And the cartoon that you have on your screen says, you know, peacekeepers will come when there is peace, which is absolutely ridiculous because the peacekeepers are already there and they're supposed to bring the peace, not wait for it to happen and then go. But so they haven't been effective, and they're not effective in relation to COVID because we should have had global solidarity, which we now have a little bit of in vaccinations. But we should be seeing this as a problem for everybody working together to make sure that every person in this world, and there's nearly 8 billion of us, so we need 16 billion doses of vaccines. So let's get together to get those going, you know, but that's not happening. Everybody, it's now kind of vaccine nationalism. We've even invented a new term for it. The other thing that I think, and COVID again has really highlighted this, is the challenge of the democratic deficit. And you will have heard in this country as elsewhere, some places more loudly than others, we are not being listened to as citizens, as people who have sovereignty vested in us, and our government is our servants, not us as their servants. So that's really quite challenging. And then COVID has helped with this because we're now in a technological society with surveillance and the securitization of society proceeding at a huge pace, and we're not even aware of it, because I can tell you from the work I've been doing with COVID in China, the little smartphone tells the Chinese government everything about you. But you need it in order to be able to go around, because if you've got a green dot on your smartphone, then you can go and carry about business as normal. If you've got an orange one, you better isolate. And if you've got a red one, then you are in quarantine. So they know everything about you, because the minute you go out the door, you know, they're going to check that out. And that's going to happen even in the academy. We will be having to tell somebody when we go from one building to the other in case they have to track and trace us because we've caught COVID. So this is all very worrying from a social justice angle because we know about the divides of the digital economy, and people who are marginalized will be even more marginalized. But interestingly, this is also going to affect the middle classes who've often thought that they're exempt. And the other one, which given the strength of Black Lives Matter and the strength of feeling about the persistence of racism after so many centuries, is neocolonialism is getting a break and coming up in a new form, and that is through the digital technologies. Again, we have other problems that we've known for a long time, like mass migration, but the new one that's going to hit us, and it's not even on our agenda yet, is that of climate change induced migration. Some predictions will be that up to 1 billion people will be moving out of the very extremely hot areas where people won't be able to live. So we will see the world getting drier where it's dry and hotter, and where it's wet, wetter and colder. And so all of this will mean mass migration. We've already seen it. It's been recorded now for at least 2 decades in the US, where older people from Florida, not that Donald Trump is showing us this, but Donald Trump has gone to Florida. Most older Floridans, if that's the word they use, are migrating up to the north because it's cooler. So we're already seeing some of these effects. And in the global south, a lot of people, and including the Syrian crisis, started off originally because there was a drought in southwest Syria, and 1 million people moved to southeast Syria because they had rain there and agriculture. And that was when people said, hey, you can't come here. This is our area. Go back to where you were. And so we need to start thinking about this because this is extremely worrying, and it's going to happen because we've been so bad as an international community at dealing with climate change. And did you know that India and China are not going to reach zero carbon emissions, which the UN, through the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, said we had 12 years in 2015. We've got 9 left to get to that stage. Well, India and China have said it's going to be 2060 before they get to that. And we in the UK have said 2045 if you're in Scotland, and 2050 if you're in England. So we're not even taking what we know about climate change seriously. So we really have to wake up, and social workers, because we are good at communicating our messages, have to get involved in public education around those kind of issues. And the other thing is that Indigenous people all over the world, and not many people know, Europe has Indigenous people. They're called the Samis, and they're linked to the Inuits, which are in Canada. And the Samis stretch all the way from the Nordic countries to the end of Russia, so up in the north. They're saying, and the Indigenous people of the global south are saying, we want to preserve our lifestyles, which were very, very tied into the land and respecting nature in a way that modernity uses nature as a means to an end, not an end in itself. So we've got a lot to learn from them too. And then we have the challenge, and again, the Black Lives Matter movement has made this so clear to us. We have to go in for locality specific and culturally relevant practice, because we have to acknowledge that we're all diverse and different, but we also all share one planet. So we have to work in ways that will enable us to get together. And we do have to acknowledge that not everybody agrees with the values of social work, like justice. and equality and diversity. But yet we have to stand by those values and make sure that we're carrying them forward. And we also have to include service user involvement. We're the only profession at the moment that is saying we really want to listen to service users. And we've been saying this for a very long time. Beresford and Croft have been leading the way in this for decades. The other thing that is new, and we have to stop saying as social workers, oh, human-made and man-made disasters and natural disasters, oh, those are things that some scientists worry about. No, it's not, because we as social workers are always there in every disaster. We just are invisible, but we're there, we're providing help, especially in the relief stage. We give people food, clothing, shelter, reunite families, and a whole range of other things, medicines that I could go on about. And we also have to deal with what I call manufactured scarcities, because currently there are enough resources on planet Earth for everyone to have their fair share to lead a decent life. And yet we have about 3 billion people who are living under the poverty line across the world. And we know that even in this country, 1 in 4 children lives in poverty. And again, that's obscene in a rich society like ours. We have also violent conflicts over resources, and water being one of them in Central Asia, for example. Social workers are having to pick up the pieces of actual fighting as a result of people trying to divert water so that they can have a greater share than somebody else who's downstream, those who are upstream. So we're also going to have to say something, and this is why green social work is different from ecological social work. Only green social work has a critique of our model of industrialization, which we know as neoliberalism or capitalism, and saying it is actually abusing our environment and degrading our environment, and this has got to stop. And then also the green social work approach looks at health pandemics, like the current one we're in COVID-19. Why did it happen? Well, you know, we'll talk about that later, but it's because we have ignored the divides that nature had in place between where the animal kingdom lived and where human beings lived. So that's all there. And then the perennial, the one that we've always had in social work, which is growing inequalities. And again, we've seen this in a really heartfelt, very sharp way as a result of COVID across the world, but in this country. But look at some of the statistics that I have up on this slide. 2,153 billionaires globally in 2020 had most of the world's wealth, over $8 trillion between them. And the 50 richest Americans have twice the wealth of the poorest 165 million Americans. And there's 360 million Americans. So you're talking about half of the American population, with the 50 richest American having twice their wealth. Like, how did we allow this to happen as societies? So green social work is really there to help us deal with these, because it values social justice, diversity, equality, and inclusion. And it's there to help us struggle against these growing inequalities, which I hope I have outlined very clearly for you. Now I'm going to talk about defining green social work, and it's really important that I do this very briefly, but it is holistic and it differs from many other environmental approaches, and it promotes sustainability. It's built into it, and it argues that we as human beings have a duty of care for the planet, and this includes the plants, the animals, and the physical environment. Because if we care for planet Earth, it will care for us. And if we don't, then it has its own way of getting back at us. And that's where extreme weather events, storms, floods, droughts are, and a few examples of that. The other thing that I think we can learn from other societies, both Eastern religions, for example, but First Nations in Canada and Indigenous people in other parts of the world. Our Indigenous people want to be called First Nations because they say they were there first. But they have a spiritual link with nature, and we're beginning to realize that as a result of COVID, when people say, yeah, I want to go and walk in a green space so that I can get back in touch with my spiritual side of me. And that's really important. Unfortunately, some of us, like I guess I'm the daughter of a mother who was a farmer's daughter, and she taught us to love the land and the gardens and all green things. So it's passed on to me, and now it's become green social work. The other thing that we do, as I've already explained, is we stand against the exploitation of nature, and we really critique our socio-economic models for development. We also recognize the world is interconnected and interdependent. What we do in one country affects everyone in other parts of the world. So we cannot just think we're an island, as some of the Brexiteers like to think we are. Yes, we are an island, but we're an island that is connected to the rest of the world, and we're dependent or interdependent on many other people to supply us with the goods that we don't have here in our own country. So it is really important and critical that we as social workers promote social solidarity and the public good over private greed. Private greed has had a long run since Thatcherism introduced it in this country in the 80s. We do endorse as green social workers the environment and value the environment, human rights, environmental justice. I argue in green social work is part of social justice. So you can't talk about social justice without acknowledging that actually it's the poorest people, and mainly Black and minority ethnic groups, who live in the most degraded environmental areas. And some, like Roger Bullard, highlighted this in the US in the 80s. Excuse me while I just take a sip. Has said, actually, we have the companies deliberately using poor communities as dumps for their polluting and toxic substances. And we have examples of where that has led to huge devastation, like Bhopal in India. The other thing that we have to acknowledge green social work does is it's universal. It says that accessing health, education, the basic needs of life should be there, available to everyone. And some of these things should be free at the point of need, but we pay for them by pooling the risks and coming together to pay for them. And those that have more should be paying more for those who have less. And we should be getting rid of this I have more, you have less kind of binary that is so important in kind of capitalist ideology. The other thing is that we highlight the fact that disasters affect everyone, but they affect everyone differently. And the people who are most affected by them are the poorest people, the marginalized group, those whose ethnicity is ethnicized and racialized, and those who are gendered and non-gendered. So we experience them differently. And I have defined environmental justice as the right to live in a sustainable, healthy environment, because that is what we need so everyone can have a good life and we can take care of the planet without jeopardizing the right of future generations and the right of animals and plants and planet Earth itself to exist now and in the future. Because if we don't have that sustainable element, we will never, ever be able to survive as humanity. And the First Nations in Canada have said, each of us have a responsibility to care for this Mother Earth for 7 generations each. So if each of us cares for it for 7 generations, then that gets us into eternity quite quickly. And I've already talked about the other things, but I want to mention that also mutual self-help is really important in disasters. That's where you use the fact that everyone has something to offer and brings something to the table. Now, for us in the 21st century, the big thing that environmental injustice does is build the kind of mega cities, as I would call them, that actually use up a lot of human resources just to enable people to survive and live in kind of like these honeycomb-like cells. This is Xi'an, and most of the pictures, unless I acknowledge, and you'll see them in the things that they're somebody else's, they're my photos. So these are all photos I've taken. It is appalling that this is the way people, and you know, there's very little greenery around you because every bit of land is used to push more and more people together. And I've called these mega cities because I'm actually quite against mega cities. I think we should be living in small, human-sized cities. So I believe in small is beautiful, but we all need to be self-sustaining and self-sufficient as far as we can. That means taking care of the planet and not relying on built-in obsolescence and consumerism as the way forward into the future. Because without that, we cannot maintain global solidarities. So we should be recycling things. We should be arguing, why do I need a new computer every 2 or 3 years? You know, I can tell you when I left Durham, I had my university computer. I'd had it for 8 years and I took it in because you have to give it up when you leave. And the guy who took it in said, "This looks like brand new." I said, "Yeah, because I took care of it. I never had a problem with it." So even with built obsolescence, because that was only supposed to be there for 3 years, I had it for 8 and it was still going strong. So if you take care of things, that's the message. They will last for a very long time. The other thing that I think environmental injustice highlights is that we have broken the barrier between humanity and where we do our thing and animals and their right to have their own environment so they can flourish as animals. So wildlife needs its own wild area. And we have been encroaching on these. Why? To build factories on them, to build agribusiness, to build homes. And agribusiness, for example, why do we need to destroy the Amazonian forest to put palm oil plantations in the forest that used to have an abundance? We didn't even know what all the things that it gave us naturally to protect us and help us lead a safe life. But now we never will because the monoculture palm plantations, and if you look at everything, I'm boycotting palm oil. It is in everything. And I just discovered that they're feeding palm oil to cows in Canada, and you can find palm oil in their butter. How appalling. Cows are herbivores that eat grass, in my opinion. So why do we need to feed them palm oil? Anyway, that's part of agribusiness. So we have to have a critique that allows us to understand that if we break this barrier, we pay a price. And that price is bringing in animal viruses into the human domain. COVID is the latest one, but it's not the only one. We've had others before. And all of our viruses have come from the animal kingdom, mainly bats, birds, and pigs. So that's why we have to take seriously doing something about environmental justice. And all of us who are here in the UK should be doing something about COP26. And maybe this is a challenge for us. Let's have Social Work Day during COP26 in November as well. And we can organize that because it's happening in Glasgow. And I'm happy to do something about that, taking an initiative on that if other people will join me, because I think we have to say we as social workers are not going to accept environmental degradation, because you know, and I know because I've been and am a practitioner, if you go into somebody's house and they're poor, their house is in a state of disrepair, and you'll find mold climbing up the walls. And I know when Margaret Thatcher and I was working in Leeds, I wanted to have her come and live in a house which had the ceiling falling down because the private landlord didn't repair it. And a woman with 4 children were living in the kitchen, doing everything in the kitchen, including sleeping there, because they couldn't use the other rooms because they weren't safe. And there was mold climbing up the wall. And I had been a housing worker as a community worker, and I didn't need anybody to tell me what that needed to do to help it. So we know from our own kind of daily routine experience as social workers that the environment matters at all levels, from the micro to the meso to the macro. That's the national to the international. And you can see these are all examples of disasters. And except for the middle one, which is an earthquake, and this one, which is a volcanic eruption, although some academic in Oxford is arguing that climate change is heating up the earth and the oceans, and that will lead to more earthquakes, because a lot of our earthquakes start in the ocean bed, and to more volcanic eruptions. So, and there are rumblings in Iceland, so we do need to take this seriously. And you know, terrorism is one of the biggest human-made ones that we face here in the UK. But we have floods. This one is not here, it's in Pakistan. And these are the Canadian forests in British Columbia burning. But we have these all the time. And as I've already explained, COVID-19 has come to us from the animal kingdom, and that's why it's called a zoonotic disease, because it comes from the animal kingdom. And the more we encroach on that kingdom, the more we will have future pandemics. And SARS and MERS we've had, but why did we kind of deal with that one before it became a pandemic? And the answer is very simple. Gro Brundtland, who talked about sustainability back in '86, was in charge of the World Health Organization. And she said, because also it started in China, she said, we are not going to put up with this anymore. We are going to have to put a stop to this, and we are going to do this together. And she got everybody together, and they did put a stop to it. And similarly with MERS. But this has not happened because we have not had the leadership that we need, either at the prime ministerial level, at the presidential level, or any other level to make this happen. And that's why we're experiencing it. Because, you know, it would have been really simple in January 2020 when China said there was a new human respiratory ailment. If people had gone there to work together, it could have been stopped then and there. The Chinese were able to do it in China because they stopped travel. We could have stopped international travel like they did with SARS, and therefore we could have prevented it. But unless you have global solidarity, it will not happen. So we still have a lot to learn about COVID, but we have learned an awful lot about it. And I've certainly learned a lot about it because I've been supporting people since January when the Chinese social workers asked me to help them. And hopefully there will be some articles coming out soon. One has already, but one specifically about China coming out, hopefully in the near future. We also know that COVID-19, unlike other disasters, pandemics, affects older people more, and it affects men more than women, by and large, in more countries than in those that it doesn't. And Britain is one of those countries. More men die than women. So it's really, really important that social workers have a role to play in helping everybody understand why is vaccination so important. And yes, it won't give us 100% coverage, but it'll give us between 80 and 96% coverage. And that's better than what we've got at the moment, right? So we have a public health education like we used to do with those of you who were around then will remember HIV/AIDS. Now, I have tried to make my long kind of complicated explanations about green social work visually apparent so that people can follow it more easily. And so in this slide, I have given you all the information that you need about green social work practice. And most of it you know already because green social work builds, deepens, strengthens, and extends our generic skills as social workers. That's what it does. So we all have the basics to be able to do green social works. We all know about affirming human rights and social justice. That's what our profession stands for. No other profession claims to do that. We also tackle structural inequalities. We've been saying, you know, we're going to deal with sexism, racism, disableism, and every other ism ever since I've been involved in social work education anyway. And I was involved in doing them in practice. That's why I was able to do it in the academy. And the one that we've added, which is new, is tackling environmental degradation, mitigating disasters, and enhancing resilience. But is it really new? Do you know that Jane Addams, who came to England in the 1880 something or other, went to the settlement movement in Toynbee Hall in London in the East End and saw what they were doing? She went back to Chicago in the States and set up Hull House and started getting the immigrant community in Chicago, which happened to have been Italian immigrants, to recycle their way out of poverty. And that was about dealing with environmental degradation. How many poor communities have you seen in this country that are full of rubbish all over the place, on our streets? Filthy, dirty places where you wait for the bus. I've certainly seen plenty of them because I use public transport. So that is new. We've got to take that seriously as social workers and start saying our portfolio includes this. This is a new addition. So Social Work England, this has got to become part of your remit. Neoliberalism. We have to understand what it does to our environment, as I explained earlier. And we have to take the environment and our duty to care for the environment and everything within it seriously. We also have to worry about research and evidence. We have to become a research-led profession that does research for ourselves. I am sick and tired of all the things that I think, hey, that's a social work question. Why aren't social workers researching that? Instead, a sociologist or a geographer does that. Now, I have nothing against working with my colleagues in geography, sociology. I am trained in sociologist. My PhD is in sociology. But I believe in transdisciplinary working. So we as social workers have to have our place at the table, because I can tell you from having done this for over a decade, that what we bring to the table in a transdisciplinary way is not something that physical scientists bring to the table. And that is our concern with social justice, bringing in marginalized groups, listening to them, and what I call co-production. We are the profession that says, you know, we actually want to engage. It was called self-determination, now it's called empowerment, but we want to engage the service users in saying what we do with them and for them and all the rest of it, because we want to know what they're going to do that will make their life better and what we can do to support them in making their life better. And that's why I say what we're involved in is innovative dialogical action, because there's a feedback loop between what our service users tell us. And, you know, we all know from social work education, we have to have service users in our educational process. And we're the only country in the world that is doing that. Some of it is being done in New Zealand because they copied from us, but nothing like what we've got here. And I think we should be proud of that and doing more to develop it further, because it's still not as developed as fully as it can be. So that's another.
Lena,
Yeah.
Just giving you your 5-minute warning, if that's all right.
Oh, right.
It's gone very fast. I know it often does. You've got
Well,
such rich things to share, so apologies, but I just want to make some time for some questions. Thank you.
that's fine because I've got that it's 41 minutes, not 50. Anyway, okay, I'll be quick. Well, you don't need me to tell you a lot about all the different roles. We play a lot of roles in disaster education. So you can look these up because I've said that the slides could go up if people wanted them. And I've argued already for transdisciplinarity to be part of green social work. But what do we do that is different in green social work besides putting the environment at the heart of our work? The rest of the things you can see are what we do all the time. Assessing needs, you all know about that. Coordinating and delivering services, assisting families to meet their obligations, supporting individuals, lobbying, advocating, mobilizing for change, developing sustainable development. We do all these. And again, I've tried to create it as an easy to follow chart. So you identify the hazard, which could be poverty, it could be a storm, it could be floods, it could be anything. And then you have two-way communications in that feedback loop I talked about before, because we engage people and co-produce things. And then look at all that follows. There's nothing there that you don't know except the terminology of mitigation planning, which is we plan what we do. And then you evaluate it all the way through, which again, nothing new there, generic skills. So I think this is my last slide. No, this is the second to the last slide, I believe. But I've said all this already, except what China. China was amazing, and I hope that when it's published, you will read the article on China that I've written with a colleague from China, from Wuhan. They undertook some amazing community work. And they also undertook some things that we would never do in this country, like testing people's temperatures in the streets, disinfecting community buildings and streets to make sure that they got a handle and killed the virus wherever they could. Social workers were doing that. Social workers were responsible for keeping people in the communities and making sure they didn't leave when they were under lockdown, and making sure that they had all the food, the clothing, the medicines, the water, whatever they needed. And they were amazing in how they organized large numbers. And I remember China has over 1.5 billion people. So they were organizing people using the internet to get the resources they need, and the social workers coordinated it so that they got the resources from the manufacturers, brought them into the community, and then made them accessible to the people who lived in them. And every social worker was responsible for 30,000 people. Here we help people at a distance, online as well, and coordinated resources and information. So we did some of the things the Chinese social workers did, but we did not do a lot of the things they did. And social workers became really interested in some of the things I was saying about green social work when I was talking to them and supporting them and trying to help them understand why we needed to stop the kind of wet markets and the exploitation of wildlife, because that was part of the way in which other viruses have come and will come into our human environment if we don't take care. And we need to protect, as I said before when I talked about palm oil, both the tropical forests, but also the temperate ones in North America and in other countries. We need to lobby for change. Social workers have already done some of this green social work. This got a platinum award, and do you know what that building is? It's a social work building for people who've had their children taken away from them and they're in care, and this is where they get to meet their children under supervised conditions. And they did that with the children, the social workers, and everybody else. Now, I haven't got time to go into all of this, but you can see how we need to get involved from the minute that a hazard starts. That's why the red dot is, and we go into all the stages of the disaster cycle, from relief and recovery through to reconstruction and prevention. And we're good at prevention, and we need to get back to that. And we do have to use our skills to get participatory action research and reciprocated learning going so that we can mobilize people so that they can adapt to the environment. But more importantly, they shouldn't just adapt, because that means we can accept climate change and just say, okay, well, we'll have to all move further up north, but we need to stop it. And that's where the prevention comes in, and the preparation to stop other disasters so that we can get involved. But we are there in every disaster, which is why humanitarian aid at the bottom goes all the way through that. And listen to communities. Resilience, for example, everybody tells you, I'm resilient, we need to make this resilient, that resilient. And I just want you to know that some service users have said, I am not resilient, because when you talk about resilience, it's how you are pushing the price of what needs to be done onto me. And we know that through austerity in this country. Become resilient communities. Meet the gap left by the withdrawal of state services. And this is now the last slide. So this is where I argue we need to have a new vision for this post-COVID world. And it has to be a post-COVID green world, because otherwise we will just have the next pandemic in a short period of time. So COVID-19 has challenged us, especially the thrall of neoliberalism. People are becoming sick and tired of it and saying so now. They're sick and tired of private greed. They're sick and tired of consumerism. So there now is the time to say, actually, civic duty and neighborliness, which we've seen in communal support system, is the way ahead. And we all know about solidarity, mutuality, interdependence, and equality and human rights, and a decent quality for all, because I've talked about them already. But I have to reiterate, let's keep greenhouse gases down to not more than 1.5 degrees centigrade. And that means we need to act in the next 9 years. Zero has got to come in 2030, not before. And we need to include looking after the environment, and that means stop using fossil fuels. Let's argue for renewable green energy. That can be part of our job too, if we broaden our portfolio to include green social work. And I think these things are crucial to building this new world. There's nothing in there except caring for the environment and doing something about climate change that is new to social work. The rest of it is familiar to us as anti-oppressive practitioners. So if we lobby to bring in green perspectives into daily practice, we can move together forward, together, and together I think we will succeed. So thank you very much. And question and discussions. And I will just escape this so that I can see you better.
Thank you very much, Lena. Apologies for rushing you. I know there's so much rich content, but I was just really conscious of all of the questions that have come through. So I'll start with somebody's commented, thank you. This is so refreshing to hear other social workers talk about this. As many of my colleagues appear to prefer avoid thinking about this. When revolution happens around the world, what should social workers' response be? So that's a very big question, and I'll give you a minute to think about that.
And goes beyond green social work. But yeah, I think we have to decide, and I've argued in other situations, we have a choice. We can either be part of the group that tries to empower everyone and to include everyone, or we can be part of the group, and a lot of social workers are. You know, unfortunately, not every social work is on the side of empowering people. They do support privilege. Now, I'd like to hope that no one in the UK is saying that they're not anti-oppressive social workers, but I know, and I've been working with them, and you just have to kind of go at their pace, because that's what we do. We start where they're at. But yes, I mean, you will have to decide what you're going to do. But I can say that from a historical perspective, and I did do revolutions in my PhD and then switched over to agriculture, because there was too much horror in revolution, and that is very worrying, which is why we want to avoid revolution and kind of change in an evolutionary way. But hopefully we will be able to do that as a world, because I think we know that revolution, and I hate to tell you this as somebody who studied them, never, ever ends up being empowering of the populace. It always sets up old elites get replaced by new elites, and that is not the kind of world I want. So that's a complicated answer, but we do have a choice, and I think our choice now is to kind of like, let's get involved in green social work, in reducing climate change, fossil fuel usage. You can start by your own life, you know, recycle and walk as much as you can, because most places you can walk to, or if you're far away from your job, instead of being a commuter, spending hours commuting, move closer to your job and walk. You know, there's many things we can do. And I don't know that I have time, because I'm sure you said there were lots of other questions, so we'll have to move on to the next one.
Thank you, Lena. The next one is a more personal question. So somebody's interested to know whether you are a vegan.
I was vegan for 6 years and found it impossible, because you have to read everything, and I traveled a lot, so I became a vegetarian as opposed to a vegan, because I couldn't. And even when I asked for things that didn't have animal fats in them, I then discovered, because I could tell the taste, I still can, so I can tell, and I'd say to you know, restaurants, and even though I said no animal fats, bloody blah. Yeah, so I don't mind saying yes, I was vegan for 6 years. I've been vegetarian now for decades. And before that, I didn't know it, but I hardly ever ate meat. I couldn't take a lot of meat. So, but when I turned completely vegan, I couldn't even walk by a butcher shop on the high street. Yeah. Okay. Next question.
Thank you, Lena. So there's a double one in here. So because we've got a few, I might just ask the first one and then move to the next one. So completely agree regarding taking care of our material things and recycling. However, for those with less disposable income, it's much more difficult to afford items which have longevity to do this. And so how do we combat that?
Well, I think we have to start arguing, and this is lobbying, advocating, and mobilizing for decent jobs for everyone. And we have an opportunity to do this in this country, because Boris Johnson, so we have to hold him to his word. This is not revolution. This is making him accountable for what he said. He said he wants to level up. Okay, leveling up means giving people decent jobs, and we can build those decent jobs by building renewable technologies. And that will give people the wherewithal, because we're all, you know, most of us are workers. You know, I don't have anything other than what I've worked for. And I know that, like a lot of other people, because I grew up poor, so I know what it's like. And I keep saying to my husband, my biggest worry is if I lose my income, because yes, I may have to scrub floors, and I'm prepared to do that, but then I'll know I'll have a lot more to worry about, because I've been through it, done there, worn the t-shirt. And so that's why I advocate very passionately for equality and decent jobs and decent pay. It is about time that we stop those 2,153 people from having more resources at their disposal than half of the world. What's the justice in that? So we can say to them, well, you know, you've ripped other people off to get that, so pay it back. Give them decent salaries. You want them to do work for you? Okay, that work means that you have to pay the actual price for the work, not just how much can I get away with because I've got a government that says I can not pay. So that means unionizing all sorts of things, because that's how most of us who have decent jobs nowadays in the UK have got them. So yes, I'm a strong trade unionist as well.
Thanks, Lena. Next question. Some companies are producing sustainable palm oil using less resources than alternate oils. National zoos are promoting the Green Gold initiative. What are your views on this?
I think it's a con. quite frankly. It may work for some people, but why do we need palm oil in the UK? Vegetable oil, rapeseed oil. You can get extra virgin pressed rapeseed oil. We can grow that in this country. Why do we need palm oil that doesn't grow here? And anyway, if you're not a vegetarian or vegan or whatever, and you don't want to use animal fats, you can have nice butter produced from olive oil. But you know what? I looked at olive oil. You go and look at it. It has palm oil in it. So I refused to buy it. So I used just straight olive oil. Thank God I have a Mediterranean heritage, although I don't know much about Italy and the Mediterranean area. But that's part of my heritage. And certainly my mum cooked with olive oil. So I can make do with olive oil, thank you very much. And yes, I do have to bring it, but I have tried to grow an olive oil plant that has never produced a single olive, but I do have the plant, yeah. But rapeseed oil is better. And the other thing is that we can't grow so much of it, but you can in the South, corn. You don't need genetically modified corn oil either. Plain old corn oil, that produces wonderful butter, I can tell you, because we had that when I was poor and we couldn't afford real butter in those days.
Thank you, Lena. I'm going to take one more question. We're up to time, but I'll have one more question because I think this is quite a topical one, and we were talking about this before we actually started the live session. So somebody said, having learned how effective virtual meetings can be, or even hybrid meetings, I feel we need to not go back to the old ways of working, driving from meeting to meeting as social workers. We should be able to at least half our previous carbon footprint in our professional lives. I'm wondering what your views are on this observation.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. Thank you for it. I think we need to go for blended models. Sometimes you have to go and do a visit, but a lot of the times COVID has taught us that you don't have to. And certainly I've been teaching now. Well, I used to do a lot of things through the computers, but let's not kid ourselves. Computers also use up fossil fuel at the moment because the servers are run by fossil fuel energy, but we can use renewable energies. But yes, I think we need to start asking ourselves hard questions like, what do I need to do that actually requires me to be there face to face? And in some situations you do, because yes, we don't know what's going on behind the screen. So it's also about building relationships and trust with the people that you're working with. And I would say the same for students. Yes, there are times when we need to be face to face and guiding people, especially when they're telling you about their personal issues. I think those are much harder to deal with remotely, but some people like doing that. So I think we need to start listening to people and saying, okay, how much and why are we doing it? But the important thing is that we learn to connect with each other. And I think that the new technologies, and I was really pleased when social workers, both in England and in Scotland, went and bought service users' computers. We had a funny discussion when I was supporting some of them. They said, oh, well, we gave it to them and we've got to get them back from them. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I said, why? You went and raised for this separately from, you know, your normal budget. And you got it mainly from the voluntary sector. So why can't you just give it to them as a gift? Why give it to them as something that you have to take back? Like I had to with my computer that I would still be using if they didn't take it away from me. I said, but I'm only going to another university. Does it matter? No, it's ours. Anyway, so I think there are things we can do. We need to get rid of the digital divide. And that means, and again, you know, Boris Johnson has said this. He wants everybody to be on fast broadband. Well, let's get it rolled out. And now he's gone back on his word and said only 85%. No, thank you. 100% of us, because people who live in rural areas don't have good broadband. So therefore, let's get rid of the inequalities that we know about, and we can lobby for those. And then use, because we don't have to be there all the time. And I was very privileged to be part of the the Social Workers Association, the International Federation of Social Workers conference last summer. They had 20,000 people on Zoom. So if we can do that for one, we can do it for all. Now, there will be times when we don't want to do that, but otherwise, let's go for blended learning, blended practice, and use it to develop the relationships that we can. I've met people I would never meet through Zoom and Teams.
Great, thank you very much, Lena. It's been an absolutely fantastic session. So much rich learning for everybody to take away. Just to remind everybody, the recording will be made available shortly after Social Work Week, and we'll be sharing it on our YouTube channel. We hope that you've all had a fantastic session, and that we would appreciate it if you could take some time to complete the brief survey which Ioana will have put in the Q&A section. We'd welcome any thoughts or feedback that you might have via the post-event survey, or by emailing us on socialworkweek@socialworkengland.org.uk. Thank you once again for joining us, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of the week. Take care, everybody.
And thank you to everyone, and thank you to you as well for chairing this so ably, Anina. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.